Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to be looking at the January 1926 issue of Weird Tales. I find the cover of this one rather uninspiring, although the subject represented is fairly typical of pulp magazines. We see a man strapped to some sort of operating table and somebody's shining a light, which might be some sort of pseudo-technological ray on him. Let's move on to the table of contents, in which we see there's 11 stories, part 1 of a new serial, and part 3 of another. We also have 3 poems, so let's get into it. And the first story is Stealer of Souls by Charles Hilan Craig, which has a man who is accused of a crime curse everyone in the jury and the judge and the district attorney, saying they will all die because of his curse. We then see how this curse proceeds to either ruin or kill everyone. And apparently, he will project his soul outside his body to take over the people he's supposedly cursed and either make them commit crimes so that they will get arrested, as happens with one of the jury members, or have them kill themselves in one way or another. The one little twist in this story is that people who were on the jury die in a boating accident, thus robbing him of his revenge, but still, from an outsider's point of view, it feels like his curse did play out. Overall, I found this a relatively disappointing story. It's followed by part 1 of On the Dead Man's Chest. The characters in this story all seem to be members of this gentleman's club. Members of this club tend to be single, and even worse, they are all atheists. One of them seems to be having doubts about the non existence of God. He says that he will attempt to reach his friends from the other side so that if there is a heaven, they can change their ways. And this installment ends with his death. So now we need to wait until the next issue to see what does happen. I'll also wait to give my comments on the story, but so far I'm quite enjoying it. It's followed by The Dead Soul by Raoul Lenoir. This is a story about some travelers in Egypt who, at someone's invitation, will go check out some ancient ruins. One of the travelers has been there before and has some bad memories, namely, a friend of his disappeared in the middle of the night in this location, adding fuel to the rumors that it is haunted or cursed. We then see their discovery of what happened several years before. And what happened is the person who was lost there was actually taken over by some evil entity that was haunting this place. I feel the revelation of this entity comes a little bit out of nowhere in this story. The start of it feels a lot more like those stories where there's some sort of haunting or curse and it all turns out to have very naturalistic explanations, except in this case, the explanation provided is the exact opposite. And it is followed by The Black Crusader by Alicia Ramsey. And the Black Crusader in question is now dead. There's a statue of him erected in this village. His body is buried in a crypt in the church. And the sexton of the church, who is a new arrival, when the local lord has passed away and is scheduled to be buried in the crypt, sees his chance that he's been waiting for quite a few years to break into the Black Crusader's tomb in order to retrieve whatever treasure shall be there. Now, let it be said that on the tomb is a curse, saying that whoever this tomb shall spoil for pelf shall toll his funeral bell himself. The Lord's young son, who missed part of the proceedings because he was out of town and couldn't make it back in time due to some unforeseen delay in his travels, decide to go to the church to sit next to his deceased father, and he catches the sexton leaving with jewels and gold and gems. However, it is dark, the light isn't good, there's only a few candles in the church, and the sexton believes that the young man is actually the ghost of the Black Crusader. Trying to run away, he will make sure the curse will fulfill itself. That was one I quite enjoyed. Everything is laid out quite nicely, and the final scene where the Lord's son and the sexton confront each other in the darkened church, each confusing who the other one is, misunderstanding what each one says and the other one's actions, was kind of a fun little climax to this story. It's followed by McGill's Appointment by Elsie Ellis. In this one, a prisoner who blames a district attorney for his imprisonment, probably rightly, has promised that he'd meet him on a given evening at 9. He asks the warden for parole. It is refused, and this is where we find out the warden is a friend of the district attorney. And we also find these two people might be a little bit corrupt because while apparently the parole might have been granted, the warden lost the paperwork. While he's having a telephone discussion with the warden about this, telling him the prisoner's still here, he's right in front of me at the moment. You don't need to worry about anything, even though he said he'd get you tonight. There's no way he can. Upon which the person at the other end of the line stops talking, and it seems something happened to him. At this point, the warden finds out that the prisoner has actually killed himself. The implication being that his spirit managed to go do something to the district attorney he wanted revenge on. This was a very short tale, not even a page and a half, and fairly forgettable. And it is followed by The Mystery Under the Sea by Donald Edward Keyhoe. The crew of a seaplane, seeing something in a bay, decide to land there to check it out. They get captured by a group of men who are in a submarine, and it turns out they're not associated with any army. They somehow got their hands on this sub and they're using it to try to explore a shipwreck, which is reputed to have quite a few valuable things on board. However, this is dangerous work, so they will force the captured flight crew to do some of the worst of it. There's an encounter with a giant cuttlefish, and in the end, the air crew manages to engineer an escape by cutting an undersea telegraph line. And when people come to investigate the broken line, they find them and rescue them. An adventure tale, nothing weird about it except maybe the giant cuttlefish. Certainly a page turner. At the end of it, we have a short poem by E. Hoffmann Price, which I quite enjoyed. It's called Adam to Lilith, and I'll link to a quick reading of it I did. Following which, we have something new in Weird Tales. The Avenger by H. Thompson Rich is billed as a play in one act. That's what it is. It's the script of a play. We have the characters' actions being described, perhaps in a little bit more detail than most playwrights would use, but nonetheless, I could see somebody trying to put this short play on. There's only two characters, an army captain and a nun. They have a confrontation in a ruined city that the army the captain is part of has just invaded. And it is followed by The Fair Pasty Pie by Arthur Edward Chapman. This is allegedly a fragment from a 14th century manuscript that was edited by him, though this is one of those fairy tale like stories. There's a lord, his lady dies, he has a young daughter, and eventually he will remarry, and the stepmother is jealous of the love the Lord has for his daughter and will attempt to lie about the daughter's actions to turn her father against her, which doesn't seem to work. Then, when the Lord is away on a long hunting expedition, she will order the cook, who seems to not be a very ethical person, to kill the girl. Now, a scullery boy witnesses this. While he does attempt to stop it, he fails. when the Lord returns, he reveals the truth, and that's the end of the story. So, retelling a fairy tale with much more of a horror aspect to it, though there's nothing supernatural or anything about it. The fate of the young girl is pretty awful. And this is followed by The Sands of Dee, a short poem by Charles Kingsley, which is another one I quite enjoyed and will link to a reading of also. Following which, there's a reprint of Wandering Willie's Tale by Sir Walter Scott. This is from the book Red Gauntlet. This seems to have been written with a mix of English and Scots. It is quite difficult to read. I just couldn't make it through this story. It was quite a slog, and I just abandoned less than halfway through. I'll just leave it at that. I can't say it's a bad story because I don't really know the story, but it kind of defeated me. It's followed by The Gong Ringers by Hasan Vokine. A few travelers end up in a monastery in Mongolia somewhere, which apparently has been cursed in the last few weeks. There's a tradition that every night somebody has to go and ring the bell at the top of the tower. Every night so far, whoever has gone up has fallen off the tower and their eyes have been plucked out. And the people in this place who believe the bell must be rung hold a very grim lottery to decide who's going to go up. And of course, one of these visitors is chosen this time. He brings his pistol, though he is told that this is useless against the spirits. And it basically turns out that it was just a very, shall we say, enterprising bird of prey who was taking advantage of knowing that the bodies would just be abandoned outside the village and not buried. And as a little twist, the head of the monastery was using this to send the richer members of the community to their death so that he could collect their worldly goods and enrich himself. I guess it was an okay story, but there was nothing particularly memorable about it. And it is followed by The Waning of a World by W. Elwyn Backus. At this point, our heroes have reached Mars. They've met the Martians, been welcomed by them, but not everything is as it seems. And in this installment, they escape the Emperor along with the young princess they met, and that, of course, one of them has fallen for. And they make her way to her father's realm at the North Pole, upon which, after an interval, the Emperor shows up with his armies in order to take back what he believes is his, namely the young princess whom he wants to marry. An installment full of actions and ups and downs, large scale battles in which, of course, the humans, with their invention, managed to help their allies on Mars against the Emperor. But of course, we end on a cliffhanger as the hero, right after defeating the Emperor, falls unconscious. So, what will happen next? We will find out in the next issue. So far, I've enjoyed this one a lot. I've talked a bit about some of the fun details that the writer has included in an effort to give some verisimilitude to what is pure fantasy. I'm looking forward to seeing how this is concluded in the next issue. And it's followed by The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft. This is actually a good Weird Tale story, but is not particularly memorable for Lovecraft. If you ask me, I think he has a lot of other stories that will stick to your memory a lot more. Not that it's bad, it's just that any number of other Weird Tales writers of the time could have written it. It just has maybe a little bit more style to it. It's not a bad story at all. It's just not as good as some of the best of Lovecraft. And it's followed by a reprint of Lenore, the poem by Edgar Allan Poe. Certainly one that's had quite a bit of influence, if not in the details of its content or its style, then certainly on the idea of Lenore being this love that is all consuming. I will quickly point out that she is described as having yellow hair, whereas most depictions of a Lenore that clearly want to reference this poem will often show you the goth girl with the black hair and all of that. A poem that is certainly worth checking out. And finally, we have the Eyrie. Nothing very unusual about this one. The usual praise and criticism of stories by readers. Also, a few teasers around the content of upcoming issues, clearly to push the sales. Now, I mentioned earlier that the magazine was doing better. I'm sure one of the reasons for having the reprints, in addition to featuring some classic old stories, is that they were probably very cheap, if not free. Also, while it's not billed as a reprint, the H.G. Wells stories were also reprints. This was something a lot of pulps would do in the future. So again, Weird Tales setting the tone for the way pulp magazines would be published for several decades. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the January 1926 issue of Weird Tales.